Now, a Fox 8 News special report. Disappearing defenses. The fight for the coast. Here's John Snell.
Got the teeth? It's a medium to large size rat.
Meet the rat that ate Louisiana.
They breed 3 or 4 times a year, 6, 8 in a litter, so they can populate quick.
The nutria, imported from South America in the 1930s, was living large in South Louisiana. Trapper and tour guide Arthur Mathern has witnessed the giant rodent gobble up plants and roots.
You got serious choppers on it. You actually got bigger teeth than a beaver when they're full grown.
With nothing to hold the soil in place, it simply washes away. The U.S. Geological Survey estimated nutria were affecting 100,000 acres of Louisiana marsh until a state bounty program brought the population under some control.
They destroy the marsh. They call it eat-outs. They stay in one place and they just keep eating as the fresh grass grows and new grass grows.
Nutria are just one way man upset the balance of nature.
The day the Corps of Engineers put the levees up on the river system is the time that we went from a building delta to an absolutely crashing system.
Louisiana Coastal Chairman Garrett Graves points out since 1932, Louisiana has lost about 1,900 square miles of land, roughly the equivalent of Delaware. An invasion of salt, made worse when man dug canals to tap into the oil and gas below, like veins carrying a poison to the freshwater marshes. Annual spring floods once belched new land onto the coast, but robbed of its connection to the Mississippi River, the land sinks. Islands become more and more isolated. Albertine Kimball has seen the difference over the last 30 years as wetlands that once knocked down winds and waves no longer exist.
It's very, very rough now. I mean, you come out here and just a little bitty wind, you're rocking all over the place like a cork.
In places like Lafitte, tropical storms and hurricanes have been a fact of life for 300 years. But now, even relatively minor storms pack an unexpected punch.
Most of the water was in the den, and it came up and went all, through the whole house.
80-year-old Luella Nunez's house took on several inches of water last year during Category 1 Hurricane Isaac.
Every time they come around, they said, oh, promises, you're going to get a levee, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but it never happens.
Without something to reverse the tide, the USGS estimates Louisiana will have lost all of this area in red by 2050, a coast bleeding real estate. The state's coastal master plan maps out a different future. A $50 billion blueprint spread over half a century aims to build barrier islands, marsh, ridges, and forests, and man-made structures to knock down storm surge. And it would redo the plumbing, once again linking the land and the river through a series of sediment diversion projects to mimic the spring floods that built one of the world's great river deltas.
The alternatives, if you look at the land loss projections and sea level rise projections, is that in many ways South Louisiana is out of business within 75 years, as we know it.
The fight to save the coast is a mom and apple pie issue in South Louisiana. It enjoys virtually universal support. On the surface, dig a little deeper and you'll find deep divisions among scientists and engineers and many fishermen over how to go about it. They are wrestling over mud.
That's it. That's what you got.
Charter boat captain George Ricks shows us a dying marsh. With little effort, he yanks weak grass out of the earth.
We're on land now. Watch. It's not rooted at all.
The rapid land loss in St. Bernard Parish confuses his boat's GPS device.
The map says we're sitting on land as we speak.
Instead, we're in a couple feet of water in a bay that seems to stretch wider by the month. Ricks blames the Carnarvon Freshwater Diversion Project on the Plaquemine-St. Bernard Parish line. If Carnarvon's a straw, one diversion planned nearby would be a fire hose. 250,000 cubic feet per second, or approaching the size of the Bonnie Carey spillway. Supporters argue the only way to restore coastal Louisiana is to mimic what built it in the first place, America's great river. When man put the mighty river in a straitjacket of levees, he robbed the marsh of the Mississippi's land-building powers.
If we want there to be any land here in 50 or 100 years, we've got to change the way the system works.
It doesn't surprise me that we're hearing some second guessing and some concerns. In some ways, that's evidence that something may actually be about to happen.
The vast majority of scientists and coastal activists buy into the argument that we must use the river, and they warn time is not on our side.
The only shot we really have is to create new land, and you can't create new land without using the resources that the river brings to us.
We see like these little scar marks, for example, throughout the region.
But Dr. Pat Fitzpatrick, a meteorologist and coastal researcher, argues for a combination of smaller diversions and dredging, pumping sediment to build new land. He points to satellite images of Breton Sound before Katrina and after. Fitzpatrick believes the existing smaller diversion converted some marsh to a freshwater system unable to withstand a giant surge of salt.
The area near the diversion, the marshland, is no longer resilient to hurricane storm surge. And the reason for that is because the root system is very shallow and weak.
Critics say this is not Mark Twain's river. A study by the prominent Woods Hole Institution cautioned fertilizers in the modern river, nitrates and phosphates, begin destroying freshwater marsh after about 5 years. Farther from the diversion, George Ricks shows us healthier salt marsh.
Now you see this marsh, how healthy it is? This marsh came out virtually unscathed. This is a higher salinity marsh. The rooting system is a lot stronger.
Pro-diversion scientists counter that Carnarvon is a bogus comparison. The diversion works, they say, exactly as it was designed, putting fresh water into the system. It was never meant to deliver sediment, as future diversions will. We still find examples of the river's power even today. This accidental paradise, right on the Gulf of Mexico. In 1941, the Army Corps dug the Wax Lake Outlet, a new channel to the Gulf, to lessen the flood threat to Morgan City.
I think it's definitely the bright spot on the coast.
Last spring, state wildlife biologists showed us the result. Like a new artery, Wax Lake spit out a brand new delta, 30,000 acres of new Louisiana.
The Atchafalaya Basin, for example, to say that there's not thriving vegetation there with the exact same water that's in the Mississippi River is just a fundamentally inaccurate statement.
And it might work, but it would take 30 to 60 years to start really building any land. And in the meantime, we'll still experience all the erosion that's continuing today.
Supporters point out the master plan relies on dredging too. The end result, a mosaic of barrier islands, marsh, and man-made structures to defend against hurricanes. But, they argue, the root cause of the disease eating at the coast is a system deprived of fresh water.
If you ran dredges 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, up and down this river, you'd only be getting the sand off the bottom. And that's only 20% of what the river carries. It's called Big Muddy for a reason.
David Muth of the National Wildlife Federation insists you cannot rebuild Louisiana by scraping sand from the bottom of the river. The land, the stuff we're walking on, isn't at the bottom. It's in the water column.
If you dig a hole in Louisiana, you're not digging through sand, you're digging through clay, you're digging through sediment, you're digging through silt. And we can't capture that with dredges.
Muth concedes, however, that following the master plan will require sacrifice. The alternative, he says, is no marsh, just open water.
You can't freshen the Gulf of Mexico. We are going to have habitat for trout. We're going to have habitat for oysters. We're going to have it all, but it's going to shift around.
Because I'm going to die in 20 years. I know I'm going to die. Why put a gun to my head tomorrow? That's what you're doing.
For all this healthy debate, one environmental law expert believes it could send the wrong message to Washington.
If we don't get our act together, if we don't tell a story that's coherent and urgent, I can promise that there are other places and other communities that will have a compelling story to tell.
Tulane's Mark Davis says Louisiana must have a consensus about how it plans to stitch back together its coastline and vital hurricane defenses. Even if the state follows through with plans for the diversions, other obstacles remain. For one, the modern Mississippi and the network of waterways that feed into it. When you think Mississippi River, the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone may not pop into your mind. But the Yellowstone River makes up part of what the Corps of Engineers calls the plumbing. The Mississippi drains all or parts of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. For tens of thousands of years, the Yellowstone and other rivers on the system chewed at rocks or flooded plains, sending little grains of sand and dirt down the drain toward South Louisiana.
Well, it was a different river back then, for one thing. The river doesn't have the sediment it did.
In fact, an LSU study finds the modern Mississippi carries less than half the sediment load of just a couple hundred years ago. The mud never gets here. Wyoming's giant Buffalo Bill Dam illustrates how man has changed the plumbing. One of thousands of structures, some massive, some small, that today trap much of that sediment. For disciples of diversion projects, it means we must make the best use of what's still there.
Is well-designed diversions that pulse sediment from the river during the high water periods and build the maximum amount of land that the river can give us.
Ironically, the BP oil disaster could provide an opportunity to build back nature, fines that could eventually total several $1 billion for Louisiana.
It provides a slug of money that's going to be enough to do at least some of the diversions.
In 2017, the state starts drawing a larger share of offshore federal oil money, which should provide a new stream of revenue. But some engineers question how many straws we can stick in the river.
Until we're able to understand the science behind the diversions, we need to take a step back and think about the impacts.
Until recently, Colonel Ed Fleming was the Army Corps of Engineers New Orleans District Commander.
These are not trivial projects when you're going to cut the Mississippi River levees.
Fleming raises concerns about altering the flow of the big river, potentially causing parts of it to silt in. The Corps and the state are developing a sophisticated hydro-computer model to answer questions about how much sediment is available, where, and how to get it.
Reconnecting the river to the Barataria Bay is important because it will create land. We just need to find the right places to do it in the river.
But Louisiana is far from the only place with designs on the Mississippi.
Louisiana has to decide whether it's a state that's going to grow or it's a state that subsidizes the growth elsewhere.
Mark Davis believes water will be the currency that drives prosperity, especially in often parched areas like Texas. He sees other states maneuvering to tap into the Mississippi and its tributaries to satisfy their own thirsts.
States go at it one against the other, where a downstream state says that upstream state shouldn't be allowed to do that because we want to do exactly what we don't want them to do. The courts don't really favor that.
Davis argues the Coastal Master Plan is critical to the equation. If Louisiana wants the riches the river carries, it may have to convince judges it's following through with plans for that water, including the massive river diversions.
If we don't have policies and programs in place to, in fact, put that water to use, it will be viewed as wasted water.
Not that long ago, if you wanted to know about Louisiana's land laws, you just found an old-timer to tell you about the way things used to be. That's no longer necessary. Some of these cherished places, favorite fishing spots, critical habitat, are vanishing before our eyes. The story still to come on Disappearing Defenses, the fight for the coast.
You're watching a Fox 8 special report, Disappearing Defenses, the fight for the coast.
The issue of Louisiana's land loss can be so complex, it's tough to wrap your arms around it. A few years ago, we decided to chronicle the story of one place rapidly losing land, never dreaming that the islands of Cat Bay would vanish before our eyes. Just north of Barataria Bay, dolphins feast in waters teeming with sea life. Over the nearby marsh, white pelicans soar in majestic flight. Farther from shore, there is trouble. On an island in Cat Bay, we count exactly 7 brown pelicans. Contrast that with this scene 1 year and 1 week earlier. A population explosion. Hundreds of pelicans and shorebirds prepared to nest.
If we don't build these islands back, we're going to lose all of the different nesting birds.
A few miles away, Plaquemines Parish Coastal Director P.J. Hahn shows us another island hanging by a few roots. What's holding this thing together?
The few dead trees we have right now.
Cat Bay first drew our attention weeks after the 2010 BP oil spill, when the island stretched over 4 acres. And I recall a very distinct feature that the birds used to nest over on this side of the island.
Along the outer shoreline, we had a lot of mangroves, big, high, tall mangroves, 8-9 feet tall, and it was covered in birds. They really liked this area. And
that feature is history. The parish has cobbled together $3 million to build some kind of barrier and knock down the wave action. Pumping sand and dirt to build back the islands would take $8 to $10 million.
But if we build this island back, and if we can build it back to the 8 to 15 acres that we're hoping to do, you're going to see this island full of birds.
Hahn already got some money from the state and hopes for more, or some kind of early advance from the BP court cases.
I don't want to blame all of this on BP. It certainly wouldn't be right, but I mean, certainly they had a hand in the demise of this, accelerating the rate of the land loss.
The islands of Barataria Bay are eroding, becoming more isolated, not just because of storms. Simple, everyday tides batter them twice daily. Do you ever look at it and say to yourself, it's gone? I mean,
never. I'm not going to give up till we drive over it and there's just water and a GPS marking on our map. I can't give up.
At the end of our visit, we find some of the missing pelicans on a third island several miles away. But in Cat Bay, Louisiana's state bird is rapidly running out of real estate. 20 miles to the east of Cat Bay, a $60 million project marks an important test of Louisiana's effort to create land by long distance. Near the mouth of the Mississippi River, the state is stringing together a necklace of gold. Where land meets sea, land reclaims some territory. On Schofield Island, the newest Louisiana pours out of a pipe. How new is this land?
This did not exist 2 days ago. 2 days ago, we would have been over our heads in water.
Dave Johansson runs the project for the contractor Great Lakes Dredge and Dock, building 2.5 miles of new beach.
The water line was up by the grass line on the far side of the pipe. That's approximately 600 feet from here.
Nearly 3 years ago, Schofield sat directly in the path of BP oil, one of the islands onto which helicopters dropped Volkswagen-sized sandbags to block oil. And later, crews built berms, man-made speed bumps of sand.
And this was the berm segment from Schofield.
Kyle Graham with the State Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority explains the blown Macondo well got capped before all the money got spent building the berms.
We transitioned the remaining dollars from that agreement.
BP agreed to allow $105 million leftover dollars to build Schofield and part of another island nearby. To form this new beach, the sand has taken quite a sedimental journey. In the Mississippi River, the giant dredge California chews at the river bottom, mining the material. Then the sand gets pumped to the island, the longest delivery of sediment ever attempted in Louisiana.
We've never tapped riverine sediment for a barrier island before.
The sand coming out of this pipe was in the river 2 hours ago. Generally, barrier islands get built with material sucked from the Gulf or a bay relatively nearby.
So to be able to pump it 22 miles with riverine sediment, it's the most ambitious thing CPRA has ever attempted to do.
This feat made possible with a series of booster pumps. The state's coastal master plan relies heavily on the concept of delivering sediment over long distance, but many experts have doubted it could be done.
We're excited about what the possibilities in the future.
Does this prove that you can do it long distance?
I think it proves that some of the projects that we're targeting in the master plan are doable, yes.
To give you an idea of the scope of this thing, the dredge is 6 miles downriver. The pipe comes out of the Mississippi here, heads over the levee, under not one but 2 roadways, under a small canal, and cuts 16 miles out to the island. Last year, a separate federal project remolded Schofield's twin, Pelican Island, just to the west.
The top map is pre-existing Pelican Island prior to construction. The bottom map is completed Pelican Island.
A bird's eye view best dramatizes the difference. Half a dozen projects have succeeded in stitching back together these critical necklaces of sand. Getting to this point can involve a frustratingly long process and often conflicting interests. Shipping companies worried about navigation in the river, landowners, commercial fishermen whose leases can be damaged. Maritime Industry Representative Sean Duffy recalls first hearing about Schofield Island in the year 2000.
This is what it said, almost 8 years in the making of project to see it actually working and working well.
Duffy sees the project as a model for cooperation among all the various interests.
We would like to see more of this. We want the material out of the river channel, and what better place for it to go than back along our coast for coastal protection.
These are like road construction projects, but there's no road by them.
No,
You never see them.
It's very hard to get the public out to be able to see the work.
Barrier islands are not permanent. Without more projects and lots more money, the sea will claim them. But Louisiana has managed to stitch back together some of these necklaces of gold. Now the story of one man making a difference in one of the few places in Louisiana where land is being built today. A project that almost shut down was saved in West Bay, thanks in large part to the efforts of one crusader for the coast.
You gotta watch it don't get soft on you when it gets out a little further.
Yeah. Earl Armstrong shows off new land.
We're in about 6 or 7 inches of water here.
Right.
What was this 3 years ago?
3 years, well, 5 years ago, it was 4 and 5 feet of water. No land whatsoever.
Armstrong has watched a geologic age unfold before his eyes.
There's other places that's really just deteriorating. Every year you can see it, getting worse and worse. This place is opposite. Every year you see it doing a little better.
Several hundred feet away, another island sports even more life. Well, let's see. We've got 10-foot willow trees here.
Yeah, we do.
Where did they come from?
They started growing here once this bar built up in the last couple of years, maybe not 2 years.
So we're in a 1.5 or a 2-year-old forest.
Right. That's about what it amounts to.
And to think it came close to never happening. They planned to close this thing.
Yes.
And you just wouldn't take no for an answer.
No, I wouldn't, because I knew it would be the biggest mistake they ever made.
A decade ago, contractors for the Army Corps of Engineers cut a hole in the river levee, a pilot project aimed at harnessing the power of the Mississippi to form land. The mighty river ran wild, barreling through the cut, gouging out the bottom, blasting away everything in its path. Nothing got built. A federal and state task force ordered the diversion to be closed. But Armstrong never stopped believing. So for years, the experts were saying this didn't work.
Right.
And you were saying
it was working. It just needed help.
The cattle rancher who grew up on the river believed the diversion just needed a little help.
It was running wild.
In 2009, the Corps put in a sort of backstop, an artificial island that slowed down the water pouring through the levee cut.
That's when we started seeing sandbars. Within 1 year, sandbars started coming up.
Today, hundreds of white pelicans sit on new sandbars, part of their winter home. You're not a hydrologist, you're not a geologist, you're not an engineer. Why were you so convinced this was working?
Because I've seen it happen before. And I know about different things that did happen in the old days that I was told about.
When practically everyone else had given up on the project, Earl Armstrong may have been the only person on Earth who knew what was happening in West Bay, on the water bottom, out of view.
I hardly ever seen anybody out here. I'd come out here and just ride around and look and measure the water. It was one heck of a change right here where we were standing. I came out here one day and was dead low tide, looked like a big horseshoe, and I seen it awful ways, and I could see the birds on it, and I like to broke my neck getting over here to take a look,
Armstrong went to a task force meeting, just a citizen, to confront the experts.
When I did go, people really listen. You can tell when somebody's listening to what you have to say.
Then the great flood of 2011 belched a giant plug of mud into West Bay. Islands started popping to the surface.
When he called me, he said, "You're not going to believe what's happening. You're not going to believe what's happening."
Armstrong called on local Plaquemines officials like Albertine Kimball of the Coastal Office.
Seeing is believing, and that's why we had to get everybody else down here to see it.
In a pivotal field trip to check on the project in 2011, staffers of the federal agencies saw and believed.
Once we set it up, Mother Nature takes over. So I think this is a good day.
A giant cloud still hung over West Bay. The original deal with shipping companies called for the project to pay for any issues with navigation. An anchorage was silting in, partly because of the cut in the river. Dredging it would cost millions of dollars, devouring money for other coastal projects.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion is carried.
In a compromise late last year, the task force agreed to pay for dredging one more time and keep alive West Bay.
I was very happy. Brought tears to my eyes. It still does right now. Makes me happy. Long live Plaquemines Parish and West Bay Diversion.
West Bay lives on, thanks in no small part to Earl Armstrong.
Did you save this thing?
Did I save it? I don't know if I saved it, but I rattled a lot of cages, you know, and I made a lot of noise and talked to a lot of people that made me feel I was doing the right thing.
Earl Armstrong's story represents one victory for the coast. If you remember public enemy number one, the Nutria, the state's $5 bounty program created incentives for trappers to knock down the population.
In 15 days of hunting, I got 6,800 of them.
A study by the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation finds damage to marsh from Nutria has been largely neutralized, though the rodents are still chewing up young cypress trees. And Arthur Mathern believes the population is always ready to bounce back.
But your thought is you'll never wipe them out.
Oh no, you'll never kill them all. There's too many places they can hide.
Just as scientists say, we can never completely rebuild the coast. That is a dream lost. The best hope, they say, is in neutralizing the damaging forces. In this epic battle of land and sea, that will require overcoming engineering, scientific, and political obstacles. The alternative is the end of coastal Louisiana as we know it.
Fox 8 is proudly locally owned.